Hi all and welcome back to Bold and Tactical with me, Jessica Dicksson. Today I'm sitting here at a hotel in the heart of London together with today's guest. And we are soon getting started, but before we do, I would like to remind you about that my guest is not speaking on behalf of the employer he currently working for, but from his own experiences and thoughts. In this episode we are going to dig a little bit deeper into the subject of cost breakdowns, together with a talented and experienced cost engineer. He started off as a quotation engineer at the sales side and been endorsed with words like quick learner and hard-working individual that gets the job done. He has a deep knowledge within the composite industry and is today working as a project engineer for one of Europe's leading sports car manufacturer. A warm welcome to today's guest, Stefan Toth.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, how are you, Stefan?
Great. Absolutely great. It's cold outside, warm inside, so...
How was the journey getting here?
It's the usual traffic in London, it's always busy.
We are really glad to have you here on the show, and we are going to talk about a few topics regarding cost engineering today.
Okay.
So I know you held a few positions as a cost engineer, so could you explain for us what kind of responsibilities such function has?
So yes, a cost engineer, or a CE as we call it in the industry, is a very interesting role with a wide knowledge of engineering and the commercial side of the business. This role is very important in the cost down activities of the companies, and also it's very important in terms of providing cost control activities within the company. So in that sense, it is a crucial currently role or position in any company that wants to be successful and competitive on the market.
So why do you think it's so important to have a cost engineer within the company?
I think the importance of the cost engineer role became very popular in the past few decades. And the reason is because the competitiveness on the market is growing every year, and the companies are facing difficulties in terms of controlling cost. So they want to keep everything profitable. For this reason, cost engineer role was kind of invented, who essentially his job is to control the cost down activities and the validation of the cost that goes out the company to manufacture components.
The car industry is often in the front of everything. Is this a concept that comes from the car industry, or do you think it's developed from something else?
I think it's most likely it came from aerospace, because the need of controlling the cost of every component is crucial in any aerospace kind of business. If we're talking about the big manufacturers like Boeing or Airbus, they both need to control every single cost very effectively. And thus they employed, or they created teams of cost engineers who are responsible for separate components of the aircraft, for example. And I think from that aerospace side, it came to the rest of the businesses around the world, because you need to control the cost within the company.
Stefan, you've been working for the sales side at C2I Composite Innovations International. Do you feel like that has been an advantage working on the sales side when you worked as a cost engineer in the purchasing team?
That's a very good question. And I think any experience you gather along the way of your career can be used as an advantage in your next role. I believe working on the sales side, or the side of the manufacturing, is a very insightful experience which grants you the ability to assess and validate processes with a much bigger ease, I would say. I think for myself personally, it was a very important part of my journey becoming a cost engineer and developing the skills that I needed initially, that I didn't know at that time that I needed them. So it's I think any experience is a good experience if you can apply it and use it wisely later on.
So as I understand, the cost engineer role has been growing the past 15 years. Could you tell us what are the main tools that you are working with as a CE?
So this is a very interesting question, because I worked with a few companies and every single company had some different approach It depends also on the sector the company is working in. So I think the crucial tools are the person's knowledge in this case. So understanding of each of the processes that he's working with to be able to validate and determine what would be the best approach. It never hurts to know something outside of the box as well from that same field. But generally we have nowadays in this modern age, we have available some programs, some tools that we can utilize, for example, for tool making. It basically allows you to verify and check some of the things that you might have missed if you don't know all the processes. But in general, we use something called quaff, quotation analysis form. And this is, I think, one of the most important tools that we apply within the role.
So what is the benefit for a CE and the purchasing team to having this quaff?
So the benefit for the cost engineer is to gain an insight into a supplier's process thought. So how they work, what they do, which processes they apply. And for purchasing, it gives a basic understanding of what the supplier has to do to build a part for them. Essentially, it is very important for both because the cost engineer can use this quaff or quotation analysis form to validate the supplier's process and the cost associated with each of the process, and the buyer gains an understanding what is necessary to deliver the part.
So what is included in a quaff and what does it actually allow us to do?
So the quaff, I work with several quaffs during my professional career, and most of them include a basic breakdown of processes and parts necessary to make a component, for example. So in most cases, we are talking about things like procured parts, raw materials, the process, other costs associated with the manufacturing, tooling costs, and logistics costs like delivery. So these are the key elements that should be included in every and each quaff. The benefit of having this information obviously gives, as I mentioned, an insight to the purchasing team. And it allows us to verify and validate each process's stack time, each process's cost associated with it, and any additional costs involving the mentioned procured parts and, for example, the packaging and transport, because sometimes it can be very expensive. It is essentially a validation document that tells us a story about the part during its manufacturing.
So in which situations are you asking for a QF?
So the quaff is essentially a tool for the buyer, and usually it is sent by the buyer to the potential suppliers. The reason why we ask for it is simply to understand what costs will be involved in our future projects. So in that case, sometimes we ask this quaff in advance before the project even is in a shape or form that we can manufacture the parts. So sometimes we do this in advance to understand what costs will be associated with the project that we're working on. In other cases, we ask for the quaff for a process called nomination. This is a nomination of a supplier for a certain part or for a certain type of part for the project. And this is a cooperation between the cost engineering team and the buyers to understand which company is more suitable to deliver the parts in terms of cost, delivery time, and process.
So are you also using this quaff in projects that aren't really formed yet?
Essentially, we can say that this is the case, but in most cases we will have at least an idea how the part will look like. So we give them a rough shape or a rough idea of the dimensions of the part. And this will give the supplier some idea of the size at least, so they can think about how will they manufacture it. You see, manufacturing a smaller part requires different process sometimes than manufacturing a big part. That will entail a whole different thought process. So yes, I can say that it is essentially a tool that gives us some information about what the costs will be in the end.
Do you feel like it can be challenging to get a supplier to give you all information necessary?
So yes, this is a very interesting topic in terms of trust between the supplier and the manufacturers. Usually, the quaffs are filled out upon an agreement with a supplier. So an NDA needs to be a non-disclosure agreement, has to be signed between the two parties partnering up in a partnership like this. The reason is because some of the companies have their own intellectual property and some of the companies don't like to disclose this. And in that case, we're talking about the black box kind of delivery. So we order something like a headlight, for example, and we don't know what's inside it. We don't get a complete breakdown. We just get a light, a headlight, and that's it. We get it as a black box. So it's just one price, one process. Anything else is hidden behind. The reason is they are trying to protect their intellectual property from being used somewhere else, which is understandable. But in most cases, companies manufacturing aluminum panels, for example, they all apply almost the same technology. So they are not shying away from sharing the information on the process they apply to manufacture the part.
How do you analyze a quaff, and what is the most important things to think about when doing so?
So the quaff is a document which has different line items, and basically you need to read each line item and associate it with the necessary costs. So it's like a step-by-step manual on how to manufacture a part, essentially. And you need to think about each step, and you need to apply your experience from the past, for example. If you worked in manufacturing, it comes handy in this case, because you will understand why is that, for example, machining of a given part takes so long. So you will start thinking about it. And you can actually verify the takt times that the supplier might apply in the quaff. It is also necessary to understand the raw materials used during the manufacturing of a part. For example, if we mention a exotic material like carbon fiber, you need to understand what type of carbon fiber the supplier is going to use in manufacturing of the part, what type of process they're going to make the part with. And this is all related to each other. You can also utilize the mentioned tools, the software tools that we have available to verify any of the line items in this quaff. So essentially, you're reading it almost like a manual, and you just go step by step and start understanding how the part is being made. As an engineer, as a cost engineer, because you're an engineer, you should be able to analyze this. And even if you don't have the experience, you can always gain that experience by visiting the supplier and understanding what they do.
So how does the cooperation between the CE and the buyer work?
This is a good question. I think it's important to note that it begins always with a good relationship with the person that we are working with. I think it's very much essential to have a good understanding of the company goals, or what do we want to achieve on the commercial side. It is not necessary for the buyer to understand all the engineering intricacies of the given manufacturing process. That's why the cost engineer is there for, basically, and his job is to support the buyer within this engineering side. On the other hand, the buyer has to have a good understanding of the commercial side of things. So it is almost like an organic cooperation between the two parties. Basically, what happens when we get in a quaff and we, as a cost engineers, analyze it, we usually set up a meeting with the buyer to discuss and understand what are the necessary next steps that we need to take to keep the project or the parts within budget and time that we have allocated for this. So it is essential that the two parties work closely together. And I think it's important to have that good human touch on the cooperation side as well.
So what key information are the purchasing team using to select the correct supplier?
This is, I think, a very time-consuming activity, and usually the selection of the right suppliers happens on multiple levels. There are several review meetings scheduled with the upper management to sign off each of these steps. And I think the buyer and the cost engineer needs to support each other in these activities, as it is essential to understand the engineering background, as I mentioned before, as well as the commercial background of the potential suppliers. In most cases, there is a background financial check. That is the starting point. There is a market share verification, so we verify what is the market share of the given suppliers. The stability of the supplier is very important if we want to keep them delivering parts on time and schedule. And also things like number of employees, how many benefits they offer their employees, what is the potential future growth of the company, what are the technological capabilities and the current development of new capabilities. And then, of course, the logistical services they provide for us.
We are soon going to end this episode, but before we do you have any tips for me and the listeners that want to learn more about cost engineering?
I would say be observant, logical, and understand each process the best you can. This is the baseline for a good cost engineer, and it is crucial to master these steps to be good at what you do. Today, we have at least one cost engineer in every company that you can look at, and they are supporting the cost control activities. So this person always have to be highly skilled in these. It is a very demanding role, and it requires a very friendly personality, so you can develop good communication on all levels, be it on the supplier side or within the company you're working. From my part, I think I have greatly benefited from working within manufacturing, to have the ability to be able to easily connect with people is another thing that helped me greatly in establishing good connections. And I think after all, a good relationship is always a good starting point to start a discussion with the given suppliers or the co-workers within the company. So I think from my point, these are the most important key things.
Thank you so much for today, Stefan. It's been really great to have you here on the show, and we are appreciating that you're here sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you so much everyone out there for listening. I hope you found this episode useful, and if you want to hear more from Bold and Tactical, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and following our LinkedIn page. If you have any question regarding this episode, you can write them at our LinkedIn page and we will try to answer as many as possible. I hope you're having a really good day and I see you next time. Bye.